Hey, it's James Taylor here from Music Business Institute, and I'm very honored today to have a wonderful artist and a wonderful person as my guest. The artist I have today for this interview is Barbara Higbie. Now, if you don't know Barbara before, I'll give you a little bit of an introduction to her, and then she's going to obviously tell you all about her life as an artist. But Barbara is a Grammy-nominated composer, pianist, singer-songwriter, and also a multi-instrumentalist. She's a lady of many talents. She's performed on over 65 albums, including Carlos Santana's 2007 recording, and is also a prolific solo recording artist as well. She's also performed with everyone from Bonnie Raitt, Bobby McFerrin, Kronos Quartet, Terry Riley. The list goes on and on. She's a wonderful artist. I'm really excited to have her today. She's called in from a home in Northern California. And Barbara, welcome to the interview, and thanks for coming on today.
Thank you, James. Nice to see you.
It's great to see you. And so, I came relatively late to your music. It was a mutual friend of ours, Peppino D'Agostino, that introduced me to your music. And it was. I don't know if you've ever experienced this when you hear an artist and you say, "Why have I never heard this artist before?" You feel that you can just hear it from the music. I should have known about this artist. So, I've given a little bit of an introduction about you, the top level stuff, but please, give the people that are watching and listening a bit of a background to you and your music.
Well, I'm one of those people in the music industry that, and I'm sure in many different artistic fields, where I'm kind of a jack of all trades. I can do a lot of different kinds of music, and I'm very fluent in very many different styles. So I haven't, that's worked for me and against me in many ways, because there's been times where what I'm doing is with the popular trend, and then there's other times that it's not. But I can always resurface because I'm kind of able to do a lot of things, and my music changes a lot. Yeah. So, and I'm really interested in incorporating different styles of music into new forms of music. So it's been, I think in terms of marketing, I'm a little bit of a difficulty for marketing people, but I've always managed to just keep going and keep making a living since I was 17. I've made a living playing music.
That's fantastic. And so yeah. through this course of your career, when you've, I know a lot of artists kind of struggle with this, and we'll get into it in a little bit more depth in a while, this not wanting to be pigeonholed as a particular kind of thing, and it's hard, especially if you come from a background where your music crosses different barriers. It's like, why do I have to be in this particular pigeonhole? And it's an area a lot of artists, and we'll talk about it in a bit of depth in a moment. But maybe just kind of give the viewers and the listeners maybe an understanding of maybe a time that something you've been able to achieve as an artist that you're most kind of proud of.
Oh, there were a lot of times. I was lucky that kind of right out of the gate in my early 20s, I had a lot of chance encounters. I was making a living I dropped out of the Sorbonne. I was making a living playing in clubs and on the street in Paris, and ran into all the David Grisman quintet on their first gig their first gig ever was in Paris, outside of Paris, and then came back to Northern California. So I was suddenly part of this scene of music that was happening at a very young age. So that was lucky to just kind of be in the right place at the right time. But also at the same time, I'd been playing music my whole life and was already professional. So I think those, what ended up happening is we ended up making a band with Daryl Langer from David Grisman and Mike Marshall, who I think are both featured on some of your Music Business Institute. And we had a band named Montreaux. We did a live album at the Montreaux Jazz Festival, and we were all working on writing music that was in between the cracks. At the time, instrumental music was really popular on the radio, so we had a chance to do something. And one of the tunes that I wrote became kind of this smash hit on VH1, and there was one radio station in Chicago that really took it on, and like 8,000 people came to see us when we were used to maybe 300 people coming to see us. So I've had that experience where I think I forgot my pants back at the hotel, and I went with the road manager, and then we couldn't get back to the gig because there was such a traffic jam of people.
Wow.
trying to come see us. So I have had those experiences, and then I've had long been part of kind of more alternative movements in music where people were making their own networks of distribution. There was a thing called women's music that was kind of affirmative action for women musicians. And that it's been small, but it's been my entire career that I still work in that field. It's such a loyal following. So there, I had the quick burst and the slow burn. And, I'm very grateful for everything that's happened to me.
And you've had a pretty international life. I mean, you mentioned studying at the Sorbonne in France and living in Paris. And then I know you've lived in Hawaii as well. And so,
yeah, and I grew up in Africa.
You grew up in Africa. So that's, that's kind of, that must have informed your music as well, having, just hearing different things and being around different kind of places from what you ended up doing. This idea of kind of not pigeonholing yourself, because it's really difficult when you're going to all these places and experiencing all these different musics. That's
true. It really is. And it's, I was in junior high and high school in Ghana. So then I was lucky enough to have parents that kind of took us to every festival and made us study with a drummer, a master drummer. And so I was always exposed to so many kinds of music. Music is just, it's so vast. That's what I love about it. Mm-hmm.
And so you've had these successes, and we'll go a bit more in depth into some of those in a minute as well. But the question I always ask artists, pretty much right at the start of the interview, and it's often the one that never gets talked about, a lot when you see it most interviews, is where you've maybe tried something and it's not worked out and it's failed. But more importantly, what have been the lessons that you learned from that? So has there been an experience in your life where you've tried something, it just not worked, and then what have you taken from that experience?
Oh, that's good. There was a time, I guess, so my whole 20s were this big success with instrumental music, and then also the women's music scene, which is more singer-songwriter. So I was doing both things. And then I got a major label deal from, what was it? Was it BMG or A&M Records, I guess, for a solo singer-songwriter album. And it was a big switch for me. I was just about 29 or something like that, and wrote a whole album of singer-songwriter material. I was very insecure about it. I'd never done a lot of solo singer-songwriter stuff. It was a time when that was happening a lot on the radio. And I took it from a more instrumental approach. The songs had big instrumental parts to them. They still really hold up to this day, but they're a little more complex than regular pop songs. So I was applying kind of what I knew worked with instrumental music to vocal music, and it didn't really work in the marketplace because I think especially with vocal music, you really have to be categorized. There's so much competition that you have to fit into a category and stand out in that category. I just felt like I failed because I thought the same rules applied to vocal music as applied to instrumental, and they really didn't at all. Kind of what had worked for me, because instrumental music was more of a jazz form, that being kind of outside the box worked. Yeah. And then in vocal music, being outside the box did not work. So that's where I failed, and I felt really bad about it for years.
And did it take you a while just to kind of get that kind of confidence back in yourself as an artist to kind of find your path that you wanted to kind of go on, and rather than being taken down paths that maybe were not you weren't so good for you as an artist? Right.
It's tricky, and also with for a woman, especially at that time, it was like you have to be a sex symbol and all that kind of stuff, and I don't know. I had a few stalkers that would follow me to gigs, and I was touring solo on the East Coast and had a couple of pretty scary incidents. I had to call the FBI and get some of those kind of things kind of just like backed me off of being a solo kind of, the way they market women ends up making you feel overly vulnerable, I felt. Yeah. So I kind of went back into a group setting where I wasn't so vulnerable.
But it's interesting because obviously you've had the success primarily as an instrumental artist, which is is kind of not, we've got a lot of students on Music Business Institute who are instrumental artists, male and female, and they're always kind of coming up against this thing of because the wider culture is so singer dominant, I suppose.
Yeah.
It's like how do I kind of put myself across, which is a really hard thing. But do you get a sense that that's changing? Because you with the Windham Hill artist, you were kind of obviously outside of jazz, which is primarily an instrumental thing, and in the jazz kind of world, is we know that almost that the singers are looked down upon a lot of the time, because it's like, you're not a real artist, you're just a singer, because it's very much dominated by the instrumentalist.
Right.
But with Windham Hill, where you had instrumentalists becoming very successful, and everyone was selling albums, and there was big tours, and then it kind of went away, and we kind of got dominated once again by singers and the song. That was the primary. Do you see it changing, especially like bluegrass music, newgrass, and other forms of music that are coming across now?
Gosh, you talk about change, and then you open the whole Pandora's box of how much the music has changed since the internet revolution. It's completely changed. So it's hard to generalize. I would say that, the Windham Hill movement, it started as something that was in between categories, and then it quickly got pigeonholed as New Age, which all of us just bristled at. We didn't want to be that. We were jazz musicians who were, melodic jazz musicians. We weren't blah, 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 or smooth jazz. So you got stuck in these kind of lesser than. There's a way that as soon as you start making money, it gets kind of turns into processed cheese food, and you just feel like, that's not who I am. I do know a lot of New Age artists that are, I know a couple of good friends that are women musicians, instrumentalists, who've made a path for themselves in New Age music that is really, it's pretty remarkable and wonderful. Like my friend Jamie Sieber, you should probably interview her too. She's a cellist who does looping, who does a lot of film scores and does a lot of yoga centers. She just tours yoga centers. She can do great solo shows with all her looping, and it's she can go anywhere, but it's in the category of New Age. So it's kind of like, I think now you have to pick a category, commit to it, and then you make your own version of that category. And it seems to work for the people I know. I think there's quite a lot of support for that category right now. So
switching away from you in as a music artist, on the business side, I suppose, and the career part of it, really to kind of focusing you as a creative artist. In your this journey that you've had as an artist, have there been any kind of those aha or kind of light bulb moments where you've really been seminal points from a creative standpoint, not necessarily from a business standpoint? You've maybe tried something musically, or you've tried working on a concept or an idea, think this, that light bulb was gone, or maybe seeing another artist do something, thinking, I can possibly try and take part of that.
Well, that's such an internal thing for me. I can remember being like 4 years old and just telling people, I'm going to be a musician. I'm going to travel all over the world playing music. So it's one of those, I believe to a certain degree in fate, and that we have these purposes we're here for. I think I forgot that purpose for a long time because I grew up in Indiana, and there weren't professional musicians. I never saw it as something you could do. It wasn't until I had been doing it for about 4 years that I went, oh, this is what I do. This is what I do.
I am. Yeah.
I'm doing it.
Yeah.
In terms of creative things, there have been moments where it's almost like I had this vision of myself when I was a young kid. I remember lying in bed, having a vision of myself on stage playing piano. And there have been times, one time or two times in particular, I remember where I was doing that, and I went, this is it. This is what I saw as a little kid. This is what I'm doing. Here I am. So it's that, that's the real creativity when you do, it's like Disney pounds that into my kid's brain. You have a dream, and then it comes, and that is kind of how it happened for me.
That's a beautiful story. It's, this gift that you have as well. So many people we know in life that kind of go through life and never discover that thing. That kind of gives their life juice, and kind of makes them want to get up in the morning.
Right.
And so I had this kind of strange idea at one point. It's the same reason why I think when you go to airports and you You put your guitar in luggage, at the airports. It's the reason I think that a lot of these people kick the guitars around and destroy instruments on flights.
Oh,
is because they're actually resentful of people that are doing these things, and obviously we know it's no bed of roses being an artist. It's a job like everything else. It's a career that you have to work really hard on. But the fact that you've got that, you had that kernel of something when you were a child, and you kind of had this, which is a really beautiful thing to have, and then for it to have flourished. So
that is pretty amazing.
So on this kind of on the creative side, when you're thinking about working on a new record, or thinking that you've maybe got a series of concerts and you want to work on some new pieces for it, talk to us about your kind of your creative process. How do you, is there a certain way that you've developed to you find that really kind of gets the best from you in terms of creating the songs and the compositions that you're known for?
What I would do, again, it's a more unconscious process than you can really. It's not like check. You do this, and you create a situation where you can go into an unconscious state. My approach has always been keep in practice, keep your fingers and your voice and everything very in practice, so that the wheels are greased all the time, and then create times where you just get to be free. And I compose through improvising. A lot of people, have a flash. Sometimes I'll have a flash of a melody and then go through with it. But a lot of times I'll just, I used to, before I had a kid, I used to just stay up late at night and just play into some sort of recorder. And then I would know if something came through, that it was like catching little hummingbirds as they appear through the improvisation. So, and then I would kind of keep track of those things and turn them into ones that I thought were good, ideas that I thought were good. I would turn into, kind of grow them. It's like getting starter seeds and growing them into a big plant. You have to kind of nurture those starter seeds and know which ones have real substance to them. So that's my creative process in general, I would say. Then you add words, and that's another whole thing. I think the word part of songwriting is a completely different part of your brain.
Really? How so? Talk to me about that. How does that differ from, I would imagine, your environment, that most of the time that you're composing because you're a pianist, you're sitting at the piano in your at home in your studio. But is that different than when you're writing out lyrics or thinking about lyrics? Are you in a different environment, a different place?
Yeah, definitely. But I have worked with artists that are just great lyricists, that are, there's a woman named Farron who's like a Bob Dylan. I mean, she's just a brilliant, every sentence that comes out of her mouth sounds like some sort of epic poetry. It's just who she is. So for those of us that aren't her, you have to kind of, it's the same process where you try to catch things that sound unusual or sound meaningful to you in a way, and then grow them into an entire piece. But I think with words it's tricky. It's very, especially with rhyming words, it's very difficult to find things that haven't been done before. So it's
So are you, because I know that over the years and years of people having this same thing about capturing these, you call them catching hummingbirds, which is a lovely phrase, but people like I'm trying to think, people like Beethoven, for example, going way back, would always be writing a little note, always writing, a notepad, pad was going everywhere, and then would sit down and basically put an order and a form around that, where someone like a Mozart did it all in his head, and then would sit down late at night, and it was like almost fully formed, but all the working was done in his head. So with you, when it comes to lyrics especially, are you someone that's always has a bit of a notepad, or you're always writing things down? Is you're always looking at those things?
Yes, trying to do those two things.
Okay.
It's been more of I think the music part comes very naturally to me, and the lyric part, sometimes I've had those download experiences where it just downloads, which is always great, and often those are really strong songs. I know a lot of singer-songwriters that tour solo that just say when they're driving these long, from Nebraska to Denver, stuff comes through, and it's often you get in a semi-hypnotic state and things come through. I think that's kind of the way you can guarantee things coming is to practice getting into a trance state.
Yeah. And how does that change? Because you mentioned before that you initially you got a lot of success as an artist as part of a group, and then you kind of did the solo thing, and then you felt you kind of enjoyed being part of working with other people as part of the group dynamic as well. So how does the creativity of creating a work, a song, how does that change when you add a group dynamic as opposed to just being a solo thing that you're focused on?
Oh, that's a can of worms too. I think I've had both experiences. Groups can, if you get a lot of strong players in a group, you get a lot of egos that come with those strong players. So you pretty much have to come with an idea very formed that you're willing to, play ball with and play fastball with, and just be able to throw it back and forth. I don't know. And then solo, I think some solo artists, I'm not naturally a real solo artist. Duo is my favorite form of all, because I like having kind of an equal person to play off of. And it's also a very good way to perform, because you can travel, you can make a good living as a duo. You don't have to have a whole band, blah, blah, blah. And you don't have to be alone all the time. But some people love to be alone. But what I noticed from my friends who are solo performers, and they truly are solo performers, that's how they like to be all the time, boy, do they get repetitive in what they do. So I think it's really important for musicians to make a balance. It's like choosing to be married instead of just being single your whole life. It's asking for trouble, but it's also asking to enrich your life a lot. So I think it's important to have that experience of bouncing things off other people and other strong people.
It's someone that I suppose there's a trust there, so you can express yourself, but also they are willing to challenge and willing to put forward ideas and actually be honest to you as well when time. There's a book which I've just downloaded onto my Kindle. I haven't read yet. It was recommended to me, it's all about creative pairings, and it's where you do have Lennon, McCartney, Burt Bacharach, Hal David. It's very, very common to have those pairs that work better together. And actually, I know obviously because you're in the Bay Area that I know they say this within technology companies with little startups. Startups are guaranteed to be more likely to be successful if they have two founders or more rather than individual. There's something that kind of happens that just kind of takes you through. Obviously, creatively that happens, but also I think it happens. This guy, a great writer of New York called Seth Godin, who writes about this thing called the dip, and it's this point where you're kind of you're excited initially about a project you're working on, and it kind of hits this thing, and it kind of usually most things kind of go through this dip, which is and it usually it's the people that kind of stay through this dip or the teams that stay through this dip that can actually really get something, because then it comes back out of there. But a lot of people give up halfway through, and I suppose by having that duo relationship or that other person, you've got someone there that when you're not, you've got maybe some of your ideas aren't quite kind of coming together, you've got someone else to kind of bounce off, or someone else to on stage, I imagine, in live, to take some of that pressure off.
Right, that's true. But it has to be the right type of person, because if you try to be a duo with a solo artist, it's like you kind of have to be realistic about who people are and not take it personally. I think when I was young, I used to take things personally way too much, like most young people do. But there's some people that are truly just about their own vision and what they're doing. And if you're there, you're going to be just helping their vision. And if you have an idea, they're going to take your idea and make it part of their vision. It's like, so my advice also, if you're the type of person I am, where you're kind of more of a team player, you have to get it fast if the other person is not a team player, and get out of there, because if that doesn't change, and you're just going to get resentful and you're going to feel taken advantage of. So Yeah, I don't. That's kind of life lesson 101, right?
Exactly. I mean, I was on. We were doing an interview the other day with a very successful songwriter who does a lot of co-writing with, and he's normally the guy that's drafted in. We were talking about pop artists, pop singers. He's usually the guy that's drafted in to basically deliver great songs for these artists who maybe are not necessarily songwriters themselves, but they've developed their brand persona is that they're a singer-songwriter, although maybe they haven't got stuff happening at the time. So his job is he's very, very good at coming in, working especially with female artists, and really providing quite a nurturing environment for them. But a lot of the time he's able to put forward his ideas. And he said most of the time it works great because it's a really supportive relationship. He said where it hasn't worked so well is where he's gone into it where maybe the person really has had nothing creatively coming. And he said, you've given it your all creatively. And then they've essentially taken that, said, well, that's my song completely.
Right.
And he said,
exactly what I'm talking.
He said he feels terrible. He said because the person's had nothing really to do with the creative part. They maybe added one line or something, and so it's that trust element.